David and Claire Rayburn were the couple everyone envied. Successful, attractive, and raising two seemingly perfect children in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But behind the walls of their pristine home, a sinister truth was festering, one that would explode in a tragedy so shocking it would leave an entire community reeling and reveal the terrifying lengths a man would go to erase his past. In the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Crestwood Hills, the Rayburn family seemed to have it all. Their two-story colonial home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, its white shutters always clean, its lawn perfectly trimmed, and a red front door that welcomed guests with warmth. David Rayburn, the father, was an architect known for designing homes that looked like something out of a luxury magazine. He was respected in the community, regularly featured in local news stories about neighborhood development and green building. His wife, Claire, was equally admired. A soft-spoken elementary school teacher, Claire was known for her kindness, her patience with students, and the homemade cookies she often brought to parent-teacher conferences. Their children, 14-year-old Emma and 12-year-old Tyler, were quiet but polite, high-achieving students who never got into trouble. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Rayburns represented the American dream. They attended church every Sunday, hosted barbecues in the summer, and sent out detailed family holiday cards every December. Photos on social media showed smiling faces at Disney World, beach vacations, and birthday parties. No one suspected that something was deeply wrong. But the truth, as it often does, lurked just beneath the surface. Over time, subtle signs emerged, signs that might have been brushed off as minor or unimportant. A neighbor once overheard shouting late at night, followed by the slamming of a door. Another noticed that Claire had a bruise on her wrist and a forced smile when she waved from the driveway. Once, a substitute teacher mentioned seeing Claire cry in the staff parking lot after school. Still, no one connected the dots. People assumed stress, or fatigue, or the normal struggles of parenting. After all, every family has its moments. But hidden within the walls of the Rayburn home, tension was quietly building. David had become more withdrawn over the past year, spending long hours in his study and often disappearing on weekends with vague explanations. Claire had grown thinner and more anxious. She stopped attending book club meetings. Friends said she seemed distant, distracted. At school, Emma began turning in late assignments, and Tyler, once eager to volunteer in class, became quiet and withdrawn. The change was noticeable, but again, no one said anything. According to later reports, 3 911 calls had been placed from the Rayburn home in the span of 2 years. Each time, the calls were brief and cut off. When officers arrived, David always answered the door calmly, explaining that it was a mistake or a child playing with the phone. With no visible injuries or signs of disturbance, the officers left. Claire never spoke during those visits. Looking back, those moments feel heavy with meaning, but at the time they were just fragments. Odd, unexplained pieces of an otherwise beautiful picture. The Rayburns smiled in public, kept up appearances, and continued their lives behind closed doors. No one in Crestwood Hills could have imagined the storm that was coming. And when it did, it would tear that perfect image apart, piece by piece. It was a bitterly cold morning on January 14, 2022, when emergency services were called to the Rayburn residence. The sun had barely risen, and snow still clung to the corners of the sidewalks. A neighbor, out early to shovel his driveway, had heard a sudden, sharp crash from inside the Rayburn house, followed by what he later described as a scream that didn't sound human. He waited a few minutes, unsure, before walking over and knocking on the front door. No one answered. That's when he made the call to 911. When police arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The front door was unlocked. Inside, They found Claire Rayburn, lying motionless at the bottom of the staircase. She was dressed in pajamas and a robe, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled beneath her temple. David stood nearby, his face pale, holding a cup of coffee. He told the officers that Claire had fallen while hurrying down the stairs to check on a noise from the kitchen. He said he didn't see it happen, only heard the thud, and ran in to find her already unconscious. According to him, she had simply slipped. There were no obvious signs of struggle in the room. No broken furniture or overturned chairs. Yet something felt off. Officers noted that the cup in David's hand was warm, suggesting it had been poured recently, even though he claimed the incident happened almost 40 minutes earlier. Even stranger, a shattered coffee mug that was initially seen on the floor next to Claire was no longer there. A later search would find the pieces tucked inside the dishwasher, rinsed and out of sight. Then came the second discovery. The children were missing. Emma and Tyler, both minors, were not in the house. Their beds were neatly made, and there were no signs of a hurried exit. David told police that after discovering Claire's body, he sent the children to stay with a family friend to avoid upsetting them. But when officers called the supposed friend, she said she hadn't seen the children in weeks. Within hours, an Amber Alert was issued. Police began combing through surveillance footage from nearby gas stations and traffic lights, trying to trace where David might have taken the kids. As investigators dug deeper, they found inconsistencies in David's story. The timeline didn't match up. He claimed to have called emergency services immediately after Claire's fall, but phone records showed he waited nearly 40 minutes before making the call. During that gap, security footage showed his SUV leaving the driveway. Neighbors and community members were stunned. Just days before, they had seen the family attending a winter charity event, smiling and handing out cookies. Now, Claire was dead, and her children had vanished. Speculation spread quickly. Some believed David was covering up a terrible accident, while others suspected something far more sinister. But one thing was clear. The image of the perfect Rayburn family was starting to crumble. And the more police searched, the more cracks began to appear. 3 days after Claire Rayburn's death, investigators got their first real break. In a small, run-down motel outside Albany, New York, more than 90 miles from the Rayburn family home, Emma and Tyler were found alone, cold, and visibly shaken. A motel employee had recognized their faces from the Amber Alert broadcast and called the police. When officers arrived, they discovered the children had been there for 2 nights, eating vending machine snacks and watching television. Neither child had any form of identification or communication device. Both were unharmed physically, but clearly traumatized. Surveillance footage showed David Rayburn checking into the motel late on the night of Claire's death. He had used a fake name and paid in cash. He brought the children inside, stayed briefly, and then left in the early hours of the morning. The front desk clerk told police that David told the children to stay put until someone came for them. After leaving the motel, David returned to his home in Connecticut, arriving just in time to place the 911 call about Claire's fall. The discovery of Emma and Tyler didn't just solve the missing persons case. It turned the entire investigation upside down. What had first appeared to be a tragic household accident was now being re-examined as something far more deliberate. Why had David driven the children out of state before calling for help? Why lie about their whereabouts? And most importantly, why had he made sure they were safely hidden before police arrived? Detectives searched the Rayburn home more thoroughly. When they found something chilling, a personal journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard in Emma A.'s bedroom. Inside were dozens of handwritten entries spanning several months. At first glance, it was the kind of journal any teenage girl might keep. Thoughts about school, notes about friends, frustrations with homework. But then the tone changed. One entry described a fight between her parents, where David had screamed that Claire was ruining everything. Another told of Claire crying in the bathroom for hours. The most disturbing entry, written just a week before Claire's death, simply said, "Dad says Mom has to disappear, or everything falls apart." Emma had drawn a picture of their house with half the roof missing. Police brought David in for questioning again. This time, they confronted him with the motel footage and Emma's journal. His calm demeanor began to slip. He asked for a lawyer and refused to speak further. That night, a warrant was issued for his arrest on suspicion of manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. News of David's arrest sent shockwaves through Crestwood Hills. The man once seen as a model father and community leader was now at the center of a growing criminal case. But for investigators, this was just the beginning. They were convinced there was more to the story, more that hadn't yet come to light. As the pieces started to fall into place, the truth that emerged would be more disturbing than anyone had imagined. As the investigation into David Rayburn deepened, detectives began to uncover a second life that no one, not even his closest friends, knew existed. What started as an inquiry into a suspicious death quickly turned into a tangled web of lies, secrets, and deception. One lead came from a routine examination of David's financial records. Detectives noticed large, unexplained withdrawals from joint accounts shared with Claire, as well as transfers into accounts under names they didn't recognize. One name kept appearing: Stephanie Lowell. Stephanie lived in a town about 30 minutes away and worked as a real estate agent. When investigators paid her a visit, she was shocked to hear David had been arrested. To her, he wasn't David Rayburn, the family man. He was Daniel Reeves, a widower raising 2 children alone after losing his wife in a tragic car accident. Stephanie told police she had been dating him for almost 5 years. They'd even looked at properties together and talked about starting fresh in a new city. She had met Emma and Tyler several times, though David had introduced them as his niece and nephew, not his own children. This revelation blew the case wide open. David had been maintaining 2 lives simultaneously, keeping his second relationship secret, while continuing to play the role of a devoted husband and father at home. But his deception went far beyond lies about his marital status. Investigators discovered that David had been quietly purchasing land under Stephanie's name, funneling money through shell companies, and planning what appeared to be a complete disappearance from his current life. In short, he was preparing to abandon everything and start over, with Stephanie and without Claire. Now, with a clear motive in hand, the pieces began to fit. Claire's growing anxiety, the bruises noticed by co-workers, and Emma's disturbing journal entries all pointed to a woman who had likely discovered her husband's betrayal and had been silenced before she could expose it. The autopsy confirmed what investigators suspected all along. Claire had not died from a simple fall. She had blunt force trauma to the back of her head and defensive wounds on both forearms. The pattern of injuries was consistent with being pushed, not tripping. With this new evidence, prosecutors upgraded the charges against David Rayburn from manslaughter to second-degree murder. Stephanie Lowell was also arrested, though she insisted she had no idea David was married or that any crime had taken place. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering, based on her involvement in the financial schemes. The media frenzy exploded. Headlines called it a suburban double life, and neighbors who had once praised David now struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the calculated criminal he had become. For the Rayburn children, the nightmare continued. They were placed under the care of their maternal aunt, while the legal proceedings moved forward. Behind the polished image of the perfect family, there had been betrayal, greed, and a plan to erase the past. And one question still lingered. Just how far had David been willing to go to escape the life he no longer wanted? The trial of David Rayburn began 6 months after his arrest, drawing national attention. Courtrooms were packed, reporters lined the steps of the courthouse, and news outlets dissected every detail of the case. It was no longer just the story of a husband accused of killing his wife. It had become a chilling tale of betrayal, hidden lives, and a father's terrifying plan to reshape his future, regardless of who got hurt. Prosecutors laid out the case clearly. They argued that David had grown tired of his double life, fearing that Claire had uncovered the truth and would ruin everything he'd built with Stephanie Lowell. They believed Claire confronted him the night she died. Instead of coming clean, David acted on impulse, or perhaps a long-harbored plan, pushing her down the stairs to eliminate the threat she posed to his secret world. Key evidence was presented early in the trial. Surveillance footage of David dropping off his children at the Albany motel, financial records showing the transfer of funds to offshore accounts, and the autopsy report detailing Claire's injuries painted a damning picture. But it was the testimony of David's own son, Tyler, that would ultimately shatter any remaining doubts. Calm but visibly emotional, Tyler told the courtroom what happened the night of his mother's death. He said his parents had argued loudly behind closed doors, and when the house suddenly fell silent, his father came into his room with a packed bag and said they were going on a trip. When Tyler asked where his mother was, David told him, "She's where she can't stop us anymore." That chilling statement echoed in the courtroom like a final nail in the coffin. Even more damaging was a previously unknown piece of evidence that surfaced mid-trial. A neighbor's security camera, installed to monitor their front porch, had inadvertently captured muffled audio from the Rayburn home on the night of Claire's death. Forensic audio technicians enhanced the recording, revealing the sound of shouting, a loud thud, and then silence. The prosecution argued this was the exact moment Claire had been pushed. The defense had no real explanation. Stephanie Lowell took the stand as well, claiming she had no knowledge of David's marriage or his intentions. While her legal team worked to separate her from the murder charges, she was unable to explain how she hadn't noticed the inconsistencies in David's life for nearly 5 years. She was ultimately convicted on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and given a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. David Rayburn was found guilty of second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read, except for the quiet sobs of Emma and Tyler, sitting with their aunt, who had become their legal guardian. The Rayburn case left a deep scar on the Crestwood Hills community. A family once held up as an example of success and harmony had been shattered by deceit and violence. Behind every carefully curated image, it seemed, could lie a secret too dark to imagine. And in the end, it was the people David claimed to love most, his wife and children, who paid the highest price for his lies.